NEMO anyway. NEMO is the non-engineering mentor organization. So you are a NEEM, a non-engineering mentor, which is a phrase that we coined 14 years ago, I think now, and has kind of taken off. But the O stands for organization.
Yeah, so I'm a NEEM.
So you're a NEEM. And we're actually having a NEMO meeting tomorrow for any adult mentors that are working with teams in the non-technical areas like fundraising, team organization, team building, travel planning, feeding, meals, all of that stuff, public relations, community outreach. So everything that really isn't the robot or the technical side. And that annual meeting is going to be held in room 132 downstairs. 10 till noon, come and go as your schedule allows. People just come and go during the whole 2 hours. So please feel free to come and join us for that. Yes? Of course I can. I haven't really started yet. So I was just explaining about NEMO. NEMO tomorrow morning, annual meeting, 10 till noon, downstairs in 132. The room has been changed numerous times, so I just want everyone to know we're in 132 now. The last we heard. Is this better? Can you hear me? Okay. We still have a few people coming in, taking a seat, and then we'll get started. Does this one work? Is it on? Oh, that's better. Okay, I think we'll get started. Can everyone hear me now? Oh, that sounds like it should be a commercial. So good morning. For those of you that I didn't introduce myself to earlier, my name is Kathy Kemfield. I have been involved with FIRST since the turn of the century, but I think it's 16 years now. My son actually joined as an 8th grader in FIRST Lego League, went through the high school FRC and FTC teams, and is actually now down with Andy Mark. Actually, I think he's a referee on one of the fields, but he works for Andy Mark now as an engineer, so he's come full circle, as many of our alumni have, which is really awesome to see. But I never kind of left FIRST when he left the team, when he graduated out. So I've done a million different things in FIRST, all kinds of, I've mentored teams, I've run the FTC, FVC programs in Connecticut. I started NEMO, as I mentioned a minute ago, non-engineering mentor organization. We provide support to mentors in FIRST from all 4 programs who deal with the non-technical side of the teams, primarily FRC, simply because those are typically the largest teams that get involved with non-technical things. So if you're interested, the NEMO meeting is tomorrow from 10 a.m. until noon in room 132. Come and go as your schedule allows. We'd love to have everyone there, so please spread the word to all of your mentors for me. I'm excited to be here again presenting this year. I've forgotten how many years. It's been probably a dozen years since I've been doing these conference presentations, and it's always exciting to see everybody that shows up for them, because I always think, oh, I'm only going to have 1 or 2 people there. But I was explaining earlier that I am a strong introvert, so this is very outside my comfort zone, so bear with me, please. And we'll try and get through the next hour and hopefully get you excited about doing some things with team building. Let's see. See if I can get this to work. Maybe not. Button. I'm not a technical person, can you tell? Although I'm on computers all day long. Does the space bar work? There, I got it to work, okay. Oh boy. I actually saw some meerkats earlier this week at the Indianapolis Zoo, and I was trying to explain to my granddaughters who were like 4, oh, Grandma's got a slide in my presentation about a meerkat, and they didn't quite get it, but I thought those were kind of cute. So, Are they social creatures? I didn't realize that. Well, then this was a perfect slide. So, how many of you have ever gotten, are you all FRC? Anybody that's not FRC? Okay, FT. Okay, well, a lot of these things will still apply for Lego League. So, you get to kick off. How many of you have ever realized you don't know everybody else's names? Yeah, especially you guys with the big team over there. Yeah. Yeah, that, it's kind of awkward when you look around the room and you realize, oh my gosh, I don't even know who that kid is, or I don't know who that mentor is. Where did he show up from, or whatever? So one of the things that I'm a strong advocate for is team building, and I love to do team building sessions with the teams. Back in Connecticut, I do a whole bunch of them every fall for the local teams, and it's always fun to do because every team is different. So every team has different dynamics. Every team reacts differently, even if I use the same exercises with each team. Doesn't matter, it's always something different. So I think it's really, really important for your team to explore the concept of doing team building sessions. And taking the time, probably during the summer months, to plan out your team building workshops, sessions, exercises, weekends, whatever you decide your team needs based on the goals. So today I'm going to try and convert all of you into becoming team building enthusiasts like I am. So the first thing I'm going to do is explain why team building is important to the success of your team. The second thing I'm going to do is try and identify 3 types of team building exercises. Based on what your goals are that you identify for your team, you're going to want to use different kinds of team building exercises to achieve that goal. And then finally, we're going to explore how to plan a team building weekend. By the end of this presentation, hopefully you'll be able to take some of these ideas back with you, gather some people from your team together and start working on implementing them now that your season will be over with. You'll have maybe have a little bit more time over the summer months to actually put some of this into place for the fall. Typically, it's a different season with FLL and FTC, but typically for FRC teams, you start probably late August, depending on when your schools go back into session if you're school affiliated. So that's when you're going to be doing all your recruiting, and this is when you need to be starting with your team building exercises. All right. I give up. So the first point is that your team building is critical to your team success. I think we all recognize that. As some of you were saying earlier when I was talking with you before this session began, if your team is fractured or if you're working in silos or whatever, you're not really a team. You may be working on individual projects, but at some point during the build season, you have to come together as a whole team. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for your team to achieve any kind of success. And by success, I don't necessarily mean winning competitions, because that's not what we're all about. We're more than robots. So there's a lot more to it than that. By success can be defined in lots of different ways, but to me, a successful team is a group of people that come together with common goals and that are working to achieve those goals, one of which may be having a competitive robot. Does this look like your team? I love this slide. So over here, bear with me for a second, over here, that's your cute couple that likes to go in the corner with public displays of affection. That you try and maybe separate, maybe. Down in the very front, down there, you see the young girl or woman that decided to join the team because it sounded really cool and some of her friends were on it, but she really doesn't know what a robot team is all about. So she's trying to figure that out, why she's even there. And the big guy up in the way back up at the top, he just wants to know when the pizza's going to arrive, because that's all he really cares about. He just wants to have food. In the middle there, that's the micromanager mentor, who has to have their fingers in everything. He's got to know what's going on at all times, right? Wants everybody to be accountable to him or her, and needs to be part of everything. And then finally, way over on the right, you have the mentor that says, I don't need team building. What is this all about? I don't need no team building. Hopefully your team doesn't look like that, but if it does, maybe you can help them out. So teams are built of lots of different moving parts, lots of pieces, right? It's a jigsaw puzzle to get it all working together and functioning together well. If you've got a jigsaw puzzle with pieces that don't match up, you're never going to have that cohesive whole. It's like having a patchwork quilt. Each piece individually, each piece of fabric can be really pretty, but unless you actually stitch it all together, you're not going to have the quilt. You're just going to have a bunch of pieces of fabric. So the whole goal of team building is to get your team functioning and working together. If not, at the very least, that you would know everyone's names on the team. I mean, that's like the top level goal should be to at least know what people's names are. Hopefully, by doing some team building sessions, you'll also be able to learn a little bit more about each person, why they were interested in joining a robot team. Maybe they have different outcomes than what you think they might have that they're trying to achieve. You know, maybe some people it's to put it on their college applications. For other people, they're really interested in learning more about STEM areas or the non-STEM areas. Other people might just want to be there because their friends are part of the team, and that's okay too, but I think by doing team building, we can actually find out what everyone's incentives are and draw them into the team a little bit more. You can do all the recruiting that you want and get 80 people or whatever at the beginning of the year, but unless you actually engage them as being actual team members, you're going to have a lot of attrition and lose them. And I think that's what you were alluding to earlier. So if you want to support 80 students on the team, go for it. But you're going to have to figure out how you can keep them engaged. What kind of jobs can you have for everyone? I don't think it does a team any good to have 80 students on the team if they don't have roles on the team. I mean, you're just wasting your time then. So I think part of your team building can also be, when you have a large group like that, can also be to figure out what roles, define what roles people can have on the team, and then to match those roles up with incoming students who may not know anything about a robot team. And this applies to, team building applies to all of the people on the team. We're not just talking students here, and this is the hardest part actually. We're talking mentors, we're talking people that go on trips with you as chaperones. Oftentimes that's parents. Sometimes parents are mentors on the teams. Sometimes it's professionals. So we're talking all different kinds of people. Anyone who has interaction on the team should be considered part of the team and should be able to know everyone's name, know what everyone does, who's responsible for what. So it's not just the students. And because it's not just the students, you can't have a successful team building experience without getting everyone engaged in the process. And that means you need the whole team to have buy-in to the concept of team building exercises, which is not, that's probably my hardest thing to do, actually, when I'm meeting with teams. I always stress ahead of time when I'm planning them, okay, we can meet, on free Saturday, blah, 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 but I need your whole team there. And well, so-and-so's got track, and so-and-so's, got to do work around his house, or whatever it might be. And I'm like, no, that's the whole point. Pick a date where everyone can commit to this, because you have to have committal from everyone that's part of the team in order to make team building a success. So usually when I'm planning a team building event, looking out at the calendar, I suggest to the team ahead of time, go to everyone on your team and try and choose a few different dates that might be acceptable to you. And then the majority of people that can attend on those dates, because that's really the most important thing before you actually do the team building, is to come up with a date where you get the most buy-in from everyone. I often find that the professional mentors are the ones that don't want to attend. So I think it's, I'm not, and I'm not saying that to bash them in any way. I just think that perhaps they feel as though their role is to focus on building the robot with the students or designing or whatever it might be, versus being part of the team. And I think that's reflected when you go away on trips as well, that in many cases, those mentors are not dealing with the students once they leave the building at night. So, they're off on their own eating dinner or doing whatever, where other people are interacting with the students because they're taking them to dinner or other activities that you have planned. We have lots of room up in front so you don't have to sit. I know the front row's the worst, but I promise I won't look at you. So I usually like to say that the team building sessions are mandatory. Nobody likes that word. Everybody hates that word. Oh, mandatory session, I can't make it, whatever. Well, it's mandatory with quotes around it. So obviously everybody has obligations. If your family's going away on a trip or whatever, you're not going to be able to make it. But at least emphasize how important that it is to do your team building. And so when you're choosing a date, if you say it's mandatory, and then emphasize that every time you have a new person join the team, make sure that that date is given to them when they're joining. Please block this out in your calendar. It's really important that you attend this meeting. We're trying to get the whole team together, so please try and rearrange your schedule if necessary to join us that day. Also, it's good to have food at these sessions if you're doing a several-hour-long session. That seems to be something that attracts people, attracts me. So if you can plan for some coffee or juice or, if you're doing a Saturday. I like Saturday mornings, by the way. Saturday mornings work out well for most of my teams, like a 9 to 11, because then you're not wasting the whole day in a team building session, but it's not incredibly early in the morning. 9 a.m. is early enough for a Saturday for most people. So 9 to 11 seems to work really well. And plan on having some kind of snacks or something at it. That's also a draw to get people there. One of the things you need to do is identify your goals before you even plan this, what you're going to do at your team building session. So if your goal, I'm picking on this team over here just because, if your goal is to retain those 80 students that you've recruited, you've worked really hard to recruit all of those students and or mentors, if that's your goal, well then you have to figure out what team building exercises are going to help achieve that goal. If your team has been working in silos, I know someone over here kind of talked about that, working in silos where, the scouts are doing their thing and the drive team is doing their thing and whatever else, the chairman's award team is doing their thing. It has to all come together at some point. Yes, we're all focused on our individual responsibilities, but you have to bring that whole group together, functioning together well in order to make this work. So identify what your goals are. Once you've figured out what your goals are, it'll be much easier to figure out what kind of team building exercises that you need to do in order to achieve those goals. One of the things that you can ask the team, what have you struggled with in the past? This is a good time of year to be talking about this. What did your team struggle with this year as you went through from whatever, August, September, whatever, till April? You've been through several competitions in order to get to this point. So what did you struggle with before the competitions, at the competitions? Those kinds of things will also help you figure out what kind of team building sessions you want to plan for later on in the fall when you start meeting up again. Do you know what everybody's interests are on the team? That's a simple thing to figure out. You hand out a piece of paper and you write down what do you want to accomplish by being a part of this robotics team? And go from there. Especially with new people, they don't know. They all want to drive the robot. It's not going to happen. We all know that. So it's not realistic for them to have that expectation and not know that that might not be realistic. So I think it's important that you also communicate that, but you would get that feedback from getting this piece of paper back where it says, I want to drive a robot. Okay, well, what are you really interested in? Because that might not happen till you're a senior or something like that. So, or what are your skill sets that you think would help you be a good driver for the robot? You know, are you really good at hand-eye coordination, video game type things, strategy? So you guys know all this more than I do, actually. But getting that feedback is critical from the very beginning. So I ask teams to go ahead and ask everybody on their team, including the adults, what do you want to get out of this? Why are you on this team? Why do you want to be part of this team? Is it because your child's on the team? That's valid answer. But what happens when they leave? Are you planning on leaving then too? So, so once you've identified those goals, you can focus on providing the right types of team building sessions, and you might want to have multiple ones. I like to, because I'm just going in and consulting with teams now, I just do a 2-hour session with them typically, but a lot of teams will continue that. They'll have smaller sessions throughout the year during their regular build season or pre-build season meeting nights. So whatever works best for your team. But also one other thing, and we were talking a little bit earlier about this, Steve and I were, is that I'm a very strong introvert. And you have to remember that team building can be a painful concept for introverts. Frankly, we like to work on our own. I don't want to deal with a team. I really prefer to do solitary work, but in real life, you're going to be out there. Most of us have to work with other people, our colleagues in the workplace. So it's good for us to learn how to work with other people, even if we are focused on a solitary task or responsibility. So yes, I sit in my desk, and I was mentioning earlier also that we're moving to cubicles. That's an introvert's nightmare. But I have an office right now, and I can almost shut the door and I can focus on what I'm doing. But I also know that I have to go out and meet with the rest of the marketing group and understand what everyone else in the department is doing. So I think it's important to recognize that you may have, and first tends to draw introverts. How many of you in here are introverts? Yeah, a lot of you. And so you probably understand what I'm getting at. The extroverts are like, what? You know, team building, this sounds like fun. They literally had to drag me into our team building weekend when we had our first one, kicking and screaming, I don't want to go. This is stupid. I don't want to be with those people for a whole weekend. You know, this is like, no. So one of the things that I've learned is that build in downtime. If you're doing it, and we'll talk a little bit later about weekends, but build in downtime. I did a whole session a couple years ago at conference about integrating your introverts into your first team. So that is up on the First Nemo website if you want to go in and grab that. And I'll throw these slides up there too when I get back to Connecticut next week. So recognize if you can in advance, send out an agenda. Agendas for all your meetings help introverts, but particularly something like this where they're not necessarily going to want to be part of a team building weekend or a session. If you can send out an agenda ahead of time so they can have time to look at it and say, oh, okay, this isn't as bad as I thought, that will help. Like I said, build in the downtime also. If you can, include introverts on your planning committee for the team building. That might help too, because they'll have a different viewpoint than an extrovert will. An introvert will often suggest different types of exercises than an extrovert, and you want that mix, so it's good to include. I'm figuring it out. Okay, so before you even begin your team building session, it's critical that you have a firm foundation for your team. How many of you have a firm team organization laid out? Oh, that's good. Well, about a third of you maybe. So when I was a first senior mentor for 8 years, so I dealt with a lot of teams that were undergoing struggles. Every organization has a life cycle. Okay, so if your team is gelling together and you're winning awards or whatever, you're probably at the top of your life cycle somewhere. But then eventually you might fall down and have a rebuilding year, much like on any sports team. Every organization has life cycles. So I often would get calls when a team was down at the bottom to come and help with the team. And almost always when I did a root cause analysis, which is asking questions, the root cause of their problems was because they did not have a concrete, firm team organization in place. Or they had one and never bothered to keep it up to date every year. And every year, yes, yeah. Sure. So it varies from team to team, but I'll just give as an example. A team organization is a structure around the team that might say, decision making is going to be done by such and such a person at the top, right? There's someone in charge. That could be a student, it could be an adult, whatever. And then underneath of that, you might have subcommittees that are headed by different people. Well, how are you going to define what subcommittees you need? How are you going to define who gets those roles? Is it by vote? Is it by appointment? Do the students have to apply for those positions? Does someone have to apply to be on your team? Is your team considered to be a team or, if you're affiliated with a school, an after-school club? Very big definitions to identify because it really can have impact on you when things are going poorly. When things are going well, you don't notice it, but when things are going poorly, you want all those things in place. Who owns all of the assets of the team? If you're a 501c3, that's a whole separate thing. That is defined in many ways by the government for you, what you have to do with your assets. But all of these kinds of things, and then a team handbook that outlines all of this team organization, rules and consequences, all of these things that should be in place around any organization. Any business has this. Your business plan can be put into there, all of these kinds of things. Chief Delphi, if you're not familiar with Chief Delphi, has a lot of white papers. I think it's called media section now in there, where you can go in and see papers that other teams have published in the past. Lots of ideas about team handbooks where you can get ideas about how teams are structured, how they're organized. So if you don't have this firm foundation for your team, it doesn't matter how much team building you're doing. It's not going to help your team at all because you've got nothing to support your underneath. It's like building a house. You have to have that firm foundation before you can figure out how many bathrooms and bedrooms you want to put in it. So I'm a strong advocate for doing your team organization. Taking the time. The summer is a good time to sit down and try and knock some of this stuff out and make that an annual process. And that's where teams fall out. They don't take the time every year to relook at what they're doing. They don't take the time to say, hey, we've grown. We're a bigger team now. Or the opposite. Our team has kind of gotten smaller over the years. So some of these things that we had in place don't apply to us anymore. Or our funding has changed, or whatever else it might be. So please try and take some time to do team organization. It'll help you in the long run. So we're going to go through some of these C's. I like to call them, remember, the C's. These are things that are part of having a good team structure, things that can support your team organization, so that then on top of that, you can build on that with the team building sessions. So the first one is clear expectations. So does everybody understand what first mission is? Does everyone know what the first mission is? How many of you have actually looked? I had to look it up. I mean, I know what it is, but I had to look it up again last night just to make sure that I could quote it properly. The mission of FIRST is to inspire young people to be science and technology leaders by engaging them in exciting mentor-based programs that build science, engineering, and technology skills, this is a run-on sentence, that inspire innovation and that foster well-rounded life capabilities, including self-confidence, communication, and leadership. Whew. If you can get through all of that, wow. Nowhere in there is robot competition, because we're more than robots. So I think it's important that you make sure everyone on your team understands what the mission of FIRST is. And then if you have a mission statement for your team as well, make sure they understand what that is. And those are your critical key things before you can do anything else. If someone joins your team thinking that you're just there to build robots and win competitions, that's not it. That's not it. So clear expectations, really, really important. Um, does everyone on the team understand how their team fits into the first mission, how it operates? Are you completely student-driven? Are you completely adult-driven? Are you somewhere in between? Majority of teams are in between, but we have both ends of the spectrum as well. First does not dictate how you form your team. So if you want to, bless you, if you want to have completely student-driven, that's your choice. But you're going to have to put things into place to support that. And the opposite, and in the middle. Another C is commitment. Are all of your team members committed to accomplishing the team mission and your expected outcomes? Have you defined what your outcomes are, what you want to achieve? You know, maybe if you're a rookie team, you just want to get through the first year, a pre-rookie team back there. You just want to get through that. Is there any other rookie team members in here, rookies this year? Oh, we do have rookies. Well, you made it to championships. Wow, that's like an awesome accomplishment. Yeah. You know, the majority of first teams never get to championships. So just that you're here is amazing in and of itself. But you know you've just been through, you're living this rookie team. It's just so much information, so much to do. I think it's really important that you have outcomes that you want to achieve defined at the beginning of every year. Maybe this year is the year your team wants to win the Kleiner, Perkins, Elmer, whatever award, entrepreneurship award. That's the one that trips up the MCs every single competition. They hate announcing that one. Maybe you want to win Chairman's Award. Obviously, Chairman's Award is not something that you do in one season. However, you want to organize around applying for that award or something. Just make sure everyone is committed to whatever outcomes you decided you want to do. Comfort. How do you make new team members feel welcome? Now, it's really hard to join something that's so intense as first and kind of feel like the outsider because you're brand new to it and you don't really understand what's going on. A lot of teams do the buddy system. Anybody here do a buddy system? You do. That's great. That seems to work out really well, where they might pair an existing team member, adult or student, with a new team member, adult or student, just to kind of get them integrated into the team. With rookies and pre-rookies, we like to have you mentored by existing teams, same kind of thing, buddy system. You learn a lot that way, and you typically will feel more comfortable. Awareness of comfort levels is critical when you're implementing team building exercises. I always require that everyone participate in the team building sessions, but at a comfort level that you are comfortable with. So, for example, if I explain what I'm going to do next for the next exercise, and it is something maybe that's physical that you're not real happy about doing because you know, personal space or whatever, that's perfectly fine. All I say is raise your hand, and you don't have to explain why, and I will give you another role in that exercise. You might be a timekeeper, you might be an observer to see who takes on leadership roles and things like that. So, but comfort level, so we want people to feel comfortable when they're doing these team building exercises, otherwise you're kind of missing the point. So, clicks. Oh, that was the previous slide. Clicks. Are team members encouraged to interact with one another? Do you discourage having clicks? We're all parts of tribes, as they say, when you go way back to caveman days. So it's our natural inclination to be part of a clique. We feel more comfortable sitting with people we know. I like to break that up, and there's lots of different ways that you can do that. Little tricks when you're doing your team building. For example, you guys all, I'm picking on you today, I'm sorry. So you shouldn't open your mouth at the beginning, that just did it. But you're all sitting together over there. Of course you would. That's your natural thing. I challenge you when you go into sessions to sit in different parts of the room and meet different people, because it's amazing all the stuff that you're going to learn when you do that. And so I challenge you when you go to your team meetings, don't sit with your best friend. Go and sit with someone you don't really know that well. It'll be amazing for you to learn about somebody new. Communication, this is the huge thing. I've done sessions just on communications. But so have you defined and communicated your goals to everyone? And That means current mentors, students on the team, parents who often don't hear from their teenage children about what's going on. So it's critical that you reach out to them in some way if they're not already part of the team. What about your sponsors, your school boards, your community outreach? How are you communicating to all of these different things, these different entities, so that they understand what your team is doing as a team? Do you have an established self-assessment at the end of the year, a feedback session where everyone can answer the questions, what did you expect out of this team this year, and have we met your expectations? How have we missed your expectations? That also will help you define what kinds of team building sessions you need in the fall. Because if someone just kind of floated through all year thinking they were going to be on the drive team and they were never given that opportunity, you've missed something there. So there's a lack of communications going on that really needs to be addressed. How do you communicate to the team? To me, there's nothing, I'm a detail person. I want to know all the details. Steve will tell you, I think if you've been to any of the events that I've planned, I will send out a team welcome packet that's this thick, full of details, because I'm a detail person and I want to know all that stuff. If you're on a team and you're missing those details, some people don't really care. They just show up, and that's fine for them. But if you're one of those detailed people, you've got to figure out how to communicate to them. What happened? Now, I've been hearing a lot of stories about teams having problems getting here. This happens every year. The bus breaks down or whatever. How are you going to, the bus doesn't show up, that's even a better one. How are you going to communicate that to your team? Or if you're from a northern climate and you have 8 inches of snow and now your competition is delayed by an hour, how are you communicating that to your team? There's nothing worse than being on a team and not knowing something because somebody forgot to tell you. So there are some free text messaging services. Rainout.com is a great one. We use that in Connecticut for our events. In case you could sign up to get a text message, and it's free, and you just send out a text message. It started because of Little League games. They were rained out, and they had to let all the parents know not to show up at the field. So anyway, make sure you define how you're going to communicate, and that includes in different ways. Some of us like to be communicated with on the phone. Some prefer text message. Some prefer social media. Nowadays, you have to address all of the above in order to hit everybody on your team. I'm sure if I ask the students out here, what is your favorite way to communicate with other students or with your team, what would it be? What was that? Face to face. You really want to talk to someone face to face? Wow. That's a really cool answer. I don't. I never, in fact, in my house, we text each other upstairs and downstairs. Or yell sometimes. But we're getting deaf, so we text each other. It works better. But my son will not talk on the phone. I don't like to talk on the phone. We prefer to text or social media. So I'm surprised that the face-to-face came up. That's good. That's really the best way, actually. When you're texting and social media and all of that, remember that you can't see body language. So you can't always, unless you type all in caps or whatever, emojis and all that stuff. Keep that in mind when you're doing your team building sessions, that you are now face-to-face. So that's going to change your dynamic quite a bit versus sending out email blasts to the team or whatever, however you might normally communicate. Control. Does the team have enough freedom and empowerment to feel the ownership necessary to make decisions? Do you feel empowered? Sometimes you've got a mentor on your team that, or the main leader of the team that might feel as though they need to have control. That slide before with the micromanager, I think we've all worked under micromanagers. It's incredibly frustrating. However, at the same time, do you clearly understand your boundaries? So in other words, if you feel empowered to go out and purchase $1,000 worth of equipment, that's great, but do you really know if it's in the budget for that, or has that money been allocated for other things? This is where functioning as a team really is critical. yes, we like to give you control, but up to a certain point, because ultimately someone has to know a little bit of everything about the team. So who is the ultimate decision maker on your team? If you haven't defined that, please do so. It will save you a lot of grief in the future. Somebody has to be the ultimate decision maker. It's just the way it is. So yes, you can meet together and discuss decision making, and maybe it's by consensus or whatever you decide, it's going by majority vote, whatever it might be. Somebody ultimately has to be that tiebreaker. Creative innovation. So I think this is probably a yes answer. Does your team value creative thinking? I think most first teams do. We rely on creative thinking, innovation, all of that, but unique solutions. But sometimes we get stuck in ruts because things always worked. It worked well last year. Let's do it again this year. Well, the game changes every year. The people change every year. What worked last year might not work for your team this year, and that could really create a lot of discord on the team. So think about how well your team really does value creative innovation. Consequences. Does your team have consequences? Rules and consequences. Outlined in your team handbook. Signed off by everybody. Sometimes if you're school affiliated, you can take it from the school, or the school handbook applies before the team handbook would apply. But you should always have rules and consequences. It just helps everybody to understand what's going to happen if you don't do something that's expected of you. If, for example, you don't do enough fundraising, or you don't make enough meetings to travel, or whatever it might be, or you break one of the rules that you have when you are traveling, what happens then? Good thing to have. We talked a little bit about critiquing and self-assessment at the end of the year. Celebrate. Who celebrates all of their successes throughout the season? You do. Good for you. I mean, it's so important. We don't want to celebrate with a banquet at the end of the year. Yeah, that's fine. Do that. Go ahead. But what about you got a brand new programmer and they actually made the robot move, even if it moved 4 feet, right? Celebrate that. It's a success. Celebrate the fact that you submitted an award submission on time before 11:59 p.m. or whatever it is. I come from the days when it was written as 12 o'clock. That was ambiguous. So now it's 11:59. I think it's still 11:59. Celebrate that you actually got a submission in on time. It's so important to celebrate all our little successes as well as the big successes. One year on the way to a team meeting, my husband and I said, you know what? We've been working so hard. Let's stop at the grocery store. And we bought everything for an ice cream social, impromptu. Got there, we had more fun with whipped cream that night than anything else. We had whipped cream fights everywhere. It was a pain to clean up, but it was so much fun. You gotta celebrate things. This isn't all about work. You gotta have fun with this stuff, so celebrate. So once you've worked on getting your team organization all together, decide if you're gonna do a team building workshop, which could be a few hours long, or whole team building weekend, which we'll talk about, or if you just want to start every single team meeting in the fall with a 5-minute team building exercise, and then figure out who's going to organize all of this. You're going to find there's probably somebody on the team that will be willing to jump in and say, hey, I want to do that. That sounds like fun. And so it's going to be pretty easy to pull some of this together. So that finishes my first point, why team building is critical for your team. So the second point, so there's different kinds of team building exercises that you can use. You can go on the internet and find lots and lots and lots of team building exercises. So I'm not going to go into individual ones here. I'm going to try and talk about the general categories of them and why you want to use them. Lots of books in the library on this stuff too. What's really important for you is to figure out what your goals are and what kind of exercises will meet them, and also match your team makeup. So obviously for an FLL team, you've got some younger students. Some of the exercises would be different than what we might use with an FTC or an FRC team, just because of the age difference and attention spans and all of that, skill sets and everything. So you're going to find these exercises range from very low cost, easy to put together things that you can throw at the beginning of a meeting to some more complex, time consuming exercises. But make sure that when you choose these, that they're meeting some goals. Don't just go out there and grab an exercise because it looks like something fun to do. You want to make sure that it has value to your team. Otherwise, you're just wasting everyone's time. So if your goal is to get to know everybody on your team, know their names, know maybe a little bit about them, why they're interested in being on a team, what their skill set is, what do they enjoy doing. For example, I love to read, so maybe my role on the team might be the rules person and keep up with all the rules updates in the manual and understand all of that. Make sure that when you do some of these team building exercises that you're kind of incorporating things like that. So perhaps you have a larger team building exercise, a longer, more complex one with a lot of rules. Instructions. I might be the perfect person to lead that exercise. So think about some of your goals as you're going through these. Okay, first thing is loosen up exercises, or energizer exercises, they're often called. So these are usually something that allows your teammates to get comfortable with one another. Usually they're very quick, just a few minutes long. Start a meeting out with these, something like that, or start your team building session out with them. It gets everyone focused, having some fun, paying attention to what might come next. It also allows for some more interaction between your teammates. So these are really usually quick things. And some examples are 1, 2, 3, gotcha, and loose lips, both of which we're going to be doing a little bit later in my part 2 session. But there's usually just something very quick and easy. One word of caution, if you are the person that's planning this for your team, I made the mistake of doing one of these, got everybody all excited and happy and everything else, and then my team leader had to get up and make a very somber announcement, and it was like, oh, you just drained all that energy. I just got them all excited. So it's good to work with your team leaders and have things approved before you actually implement them. I learned that the hard way. But the loosen up exercises are a lot of fun. Icebreakers. So icebreakers are also short exercises. Icebreakers usually is to break the ice. If you've ever heard that phrase, you want to get people comfortable with one another. Yes. More than me. Is that an answer? Oh, did everybody hear him? Oh, say it louder. You have to stand up and say that one louder. That was very good. Thank you. Yes, icebreakers. Usually they're like 5 minutes long, 10-minute long at the most, but the goal of them is to learn more about your fellow teammates. So now we've all learned about Jonathan and that he has a sense of humor. Thank you. Sometimes, ooh, rough crowd, ooh. So, you want to at least come out of an icebreaker session knowing other people's names, at least their first name, if nothing else, so that, or their nickname or whatever, so that we have an understanding of who we're working with. Hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about a person, but also keep in mind that some people are very private and they don't like to share a lot of information. So often with these kinds of icebreakers, I will choose very silly things. They're really, they're nothing that anybody would have offense at. I'm not asking you for your life history when I do these. It's usually, do you prefer the color blue or red? Ultimately, it doesn't really matter, except that the people that prefer red now have something in common with one another. It gives you the baseline for conversation. And so we do have to respect everyone's privacy when we're doing something like this. But that said, you're going to have to share your name at least with your teammates. Examples of this are the people bingo. Anybody ever play people bingo? I have a first version of people bingo that we'll be playing later on, where you have to find people that have done something on the squares and fill in the squares as many as you can. Like, have you ever met Woody Flowers, for example, that kind of thing. So those are fun. The continuum exercise is also another good one. You can look that up online and see how that goes. These are good for starting the team meetings in the fall, in the early fall, when you're just gelling and getting together and you're getting a lot of new members in. So the next thing is team building exercises. So these can be longer in length. They're usually a lot longer in length, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, typically, or even longer, depending on what you're doing. Scavenger hunts. I know they've got a big scavenger hunt going on here, and it's many of our competitions do scavenger hunts. Those are often done in teams. Teams can go out together and do them. Nowadays, with smartphones, with everyone's got a smartphone, a cell phone on them. You can do scavenger hunts with taking photos of things rather than to actually get an item and bring it back. It gets people focusing on communications. It gets them working together in teams, doing some creative problem solving. These are things like those NASA Stranded on the Moon. We'll do that one maybe later if we have time in our second session. Trust walks. Ropes courses, marshmallow towers. Anybody do the marshmallow tower thing? Yeah, with the spaghetti and the marshmallows and everything. Those kind, or building the bridges out of paper and things like that. Those are all those kinds of team building activities that are kind of fun to do. But they're even better if you can split people up into different kinds of groups that they're not comfortable being with. And then make sure that you have, if you're breaking them into smaller groups, which typically you will, make sure that you have an observer for each group. So you have someone that's going around noticing, okay, who's taking the lead role here? Who's stepping up to be the leader? Who's hanging back and not being part of it at all? So those are things that you want to critique after the fact. It's not just building a marshmallow tower. You want to actually figure out where your problem areas might be. You might have a mentor that just jumps in naturally and just takes right over. Is that someone that you might need to talk to separately to say, that was great that you showed them how to do this, but we prefer on the team that the students try and learn how to do this on their own. Success and failure, keep repeating that until they become successful at it. So that's the kind of thing with the critiquing that is important. You might find that a student does step up in a leadership role that never thought of themselves as being a leader, and you can actually encourage that if they wish to become more of a leader on the team. You might find that the ones that are not participating, they're hanging back and everybody's kind of ignoring them. Maybe you need to take some of your older, experienced team members to kind of bring them into the fold, because you've noticed that they're not really part of the team. So those are the kinds of the goals for your team building exercises. And also your communications exercises are considered part of team building exercises. So those are things where you are learning how to communicate with one another in various different ways, not just verbally. There's lots of exercises around those. So those are a lot of fun too. And then obviously other activities. Teams often will get together. A lot of the more successful teams actually want to be with each other a lot. So they do things like bowling nights or movie nights at somebody's house, or those escape rooms, right? I know a lot. Did I say the wrong thing? A lot of teams will do those. Now they're becoming very popular. I think there's one right here in St. Louis too. The escape rooms, they're a room. Well, who's been to one that can explain it better than I? Because I haven't actually experienced it. Anybody? Yeah?
It's, they lock you in a room, and you have to achieve some kind of goal to get out within a certain amount of time. And then there's clues all over the room, and you have to work together to put the clues together to get maybe a code or a word that will unlock the door and get you out.
Yeah. So that's really becoming popular and a lot of fun. I know several teams in Connecticut are doing them now. So those are something to explore as well. Adventure courses, ropes courses are a lot of, get you outside your comfort zone in many cases. But that also brings the team together to bond together. Even things like working on your fundraisers like pasta dinners, that's a team building experience. If you've never served food before, you have to train your team how to be wait staff. You have to get together in the kitchen and cook something and set the tables or whatever. Any of those kinds of fundraisers. Car washes, great team building activities. They're a lot of fun to do together. Community service projects. I know a lot of teams do a lot of community service projects. Habitat for Humanity, we built a wheelchair ramp when I was on the team way back when for a woman that had not been able to get out of her house because she had become wheelchair bound and could not exit out of her house. She had to be carried out. And it was just an incredible bonding experience, and it took us like one day to do. So consider doing something like that for the community. It's really, you get a lot back from that, as well as getting your team working together. And then, of course, mentoring other teams, right? Mentoring First Lego League teams, if you're one of the high school teams, is also a really great learning experience and gets your kids working together. So that covers the different types of exercises you might want to use. So now, lastly, I'm going to talk about how to plan a team building weekend. So, as I mentioned earlier, I went kicking and screaming into my team building weekend, the first one, and by the end of the weekend, it was just such an incredible experience to have gone through with the team that some 16 years later, I'm still in touch with many of the students that were on the team, and we still talk about that first weekend. We went snipe hunting in the woods at night. Snipe hunting. If you've never... no, but we scared a lot of mentors, myself included. It was a lot of fun, yes. Snipe hunting? Oh, well, a snipe is a small little mammal. They're nocturnal. They're like this big. They're really hard to catch. So you have to go out at night. They're usually in woods. So in Connecticut, we have a lot of wooded. Connecticut is mostly forestry, if you didn't know that. We're not millionaires. Everybody knows Connecticut is millionaires. We're not. But anyway, so we went out into the woods, and we broke into small teams. We had some flashlights, and you bang on the trees with sticks, and that brings them out, and then you catch them in bags. We didn't catch any. But we had a lot of fun trying. We were not successful. And if you'd like to learn more about snipe hunting afterwards, I'll be glad to explain it to you. It was a lot of fun. So you can really extend your team building sessions by doing a whole weekend together in the fall. Some of the places you might want to look into are scout camps. Typically, well, in New England anyway, they have to shut off the water and everything like in October, the end of October, before the big freezes come. So the camp isn't being used, so you can rent them really cheaply. So scout camps. There's also other kinds of retreats that often have down seasons where they're not being used. Sometimes church halls or universities have times when their dorm rooms may not be being used, but the fall is usually typically a busy season for them. That might not work out for you, depending on when you want to hold this. But there's lots of different places that you can look into. Try to think outside the box for a place that you could hold a team building where you might have access to facilities. So you need bathrooms, some place to sleep, even if it's on the floor at a gym, and a kitchen area. So form the committee to plan the weekends. Get everybody involved doing this, not just adults planning this. It has to have input from all kinds of people on your team, because everybody's going to have different viewpoints for what they want to see happen at a team building weekend. Secure the location as soon as possible so you can get the date out to everybody as early as possible. So it's really important to make sure everybody understands, try and block that whole weekend off if possible, or at least join us for part of the weekend anyway. Form different committees to work on different things and rotate through. So you have a committee that's cooking, you have a committee that's cleaning up, you have another group that's doing a team building session, and then you rotate so that everybody gets a chance to do a little bit of everything. Usually late October is a good time to plan these if you can, depending on whether you're busy with FLL season and other things that are going on, but late October is often a good time for this. Getting buy-in, and we mentioned this earlier, And then another thing to think about is hiring an expert that does this to help you, to come in and help you actually implement the exercises. Because if you're doing the exercises, you're not part of the exercises. So it's nice if you can afford to have someone come in and set up the ropes course or whatever it might be. This is what they do for a living. So it's a nice thing to get somebody to come in if your budget allows that. So let me summarize here. So first I talked about the need for doing team building in order to have a successful team, getting to know your members, getting to know a little bit more about them. Remember all those C's: commitment, communications, all of that, critiquing, clicks. Then I talked about the different kinds of team building exercises. You've got your loosen up exercises, your icebreakers, and then finally the larger, more complex actual team building exercises and communications exercises as well. And then finally we talked about holding a team building weekend and what you need to do for that. And in conclusion, I really think it's important that your team recognizes that they have to work together in order to be successful in FIRST. There's just so many different things that you have to do that it gets too easy to get lost in all of that and not come together as a whole team. And since we're on this slide, I know it's at the end of our time, but I have to ask, anybody here know what this is? No, well, I know it's sheep. They all have this wooden brace thing on them. It's a Y-shaped thing, and I'm not a farmer, so I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe somebody would know. No? My 4-year-old granddaughter, that was the first thing she saw on it. She says, "Why does he have a stick of wood coming out of his head?" I don't know. And then finally, bonus, yay. So now that you've learned why team building is so important, I invite you all to come back in an hour. Unfortunately, it's an hour from now, but I have room for 30 participants in a 2-hour team building session where, if you can't stay for the whole 2 hours, that's fine too. But if you want to come back and join me, I'll be across the hall in 274. We're going to actually do an actual team building workshop that I would do with an FRC team. 2 hours of having fun doing icebreakers and loosen up exercises and some team building exercises. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming.